Hello and welcome to the Singularity Lab. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining today for This Week in Tech. Join us every week as we explore the intersection of society, culture, and human evolution through the latest advancements in science technology. Thank you so much for joining us as we help you navigate this exciting and rapidly changing landscape of technology and its impact on society. Brooks Lopez joining me today, my co-host, is a program planner in the defense industry and has degrees in psychology with a focus on neuroscience and learning and memory. Brooks, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, Mike?
Doing excellent. We've got an amazing show for you all. A lot to cover today. We're going to discuss the breaking chip wars. We've got Nvidia that needs to be on the lookout because apparently Microsoft is coming after them. We're going to be talking about moon telescopes. We're going to be talking about Google Brain and Deep Mind joining forces. We're going to be talking about the viral new music from The Weeknd and Drake in quotation marks. We're going to talk about VR and AI psychedelic experiences. And will AI achieve human intelligence? We've got a lot to share with you today. Aaron Desario, great to hear you and see you. Simon Fly, hello and welcome. Michael's a little laggy. Visually, audio is fine. So you catching that too? Am I a little laggy?
Yeah, you seem a little bit. I can hear your audio flawlessly, but you're about 4 or 5 frames behind for me visually.
Weird. I'm going to Brooks. Why don't you do me a favor? And if you could start explaining this this first article. And then I'll do a quick refresh and see if I can get this fixed. But maybe if you want to take us into the chip wars, Nvidia versus Microsoft.
Absolutely. So, we've actually talked about the chip wars before in the concern from a little bit more of a geopolitical space. Who's going to be producing the superconductors that are going to be powering both AI as well as our personal PCs, phones, everything else moving forward for the next several years? Had some concerns about China encroaching upon Taiwanese space, what the United States might do if that actually occurs. Is TSMC in trouble? But this is really more focused on company to company, a little bit real competition in the market. I believe the chip is called the Athena chip that Microsoft's trying to develop. And at this point in time, something of this caliber is selling for correct me if I'm wrong, Randy. I know that you can throw some comments in here, but I think we're looking at like $40,000 a piece on eBay, something in that range for chips of this nature.
I have bad news. My camera is completely out, so I think we're just going to go audio for me today. How about that? How about them apples?
I've got 2 AIs to work with today.
All right, so quickly. So, Brooks, I don't know how far you got into.
I was kind of refreshing the worldscape that we definitely have some concerns about Chinese infraction upon Taiwanese chip production, what that might look like for U.S. getting involved. But this is a little bit more microcosm. This is the development of chips by typically Nvidia and Microsoft trying to get involved with it's the Athena chip, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. So the Athena chip and what they're looking to develop, and this has been undercover since about 2019. I think this story is recently broke, but the entire idea here is that Microsoft is going to need a whole lot of power when it comes to developing their AI engines, their LLMs. In addition to GPT, they've got a lot that they're doing behind the scenes, and they're building into all their teamwork and cloud and everything that they are doing. And so they're going to need a lot more chips. One of the fascinating things I found just about like NVIDIA, I think we saw, I think it was 10,000 chips that were purchased from NVIDIA recently for Elon Musk's new AI startup. And one of the things that I found so fascinating was I found if you go over to eBay, you can actually find the H100 GPUs that NVIDIA is selling for $40,000 a piece on eBay, which is absolutely mind-boggling. So you could see why Microsoft might want to start driving the costs down on some of these chips.
Well, and there's a lot of things that go into this, right? We had a surge in the need for GPUs when the concern for, or not concern, the huge rush, the gold rush, if you will, for Bitcoin and Ethereum and the other blockchain currencies were in place, and people were buying these GPUs like crazy, and they were skyrocketing the price. I mean, you couldn't buy them for retail to save your life. And now these are obviously slightly larger units than what you would use in your home to have like a Bitcoin farm, but they're not being manufactured any faster.
Ooh, what do we got here? Oh, here we go. For Tesla H100, 800 gig NVIDIA deep learning GPU compute graphics card, $45,000. Over where is that? Is that eBay?
It looks like eBay.
Yeah, that is just absolutely insane. But as Microsoft continues to roll out new features with Bing, with their Office apps, and also if you get actually over on GitHub too, they've got quite a few things that they're building out, which we'll be exploring as they continue to do so. But this is going to be a processing fight, and this brings me back to what we talked a couple weeks about on the show was the CHIPS Act, which was something that I believe was actually originally started to put together this idea in Congress over the past several years, but this just passed, I think, 2 years ago, with the purpose of setting up the U.S. Chip manufacturing industry to start actually really producing these chips in a huge way. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this fight progresses.
And one of the things that you've mentioned over the past couple of weeks that I think will bring a lot of heady advantage to this is Elon's desire to scale anything he does. And if the goal here is really to produce an artificial intelligence that's on par with Bard or with ChatGPT, he's going to have to either desire himself to produce these chips, maybe create a gigafactory of his own chip manufacturing mindset, or find a producer, a manufacturer that can meet his needs.
Absolutely. And it's going to be, as he's entering this field and as the competition heats up, the fight for chips is going to be really palpable, and the cost for these chips is going to go up and up and up. And I think that's why it's so. It's really interesting because I think this fight for AI chips is going to push American manufacturing and American technology back into the fray, where it's been so far behind for so long. We've been incredibly dependent on Taiwan. We've been incredibly dependent, trying to catch up in this market. As you said earlier, in this fight with this race with the Chinese as well, this AI race, it's definitely going to be something I believe that pushes America back into the fray when it comes to technological manufacturing.
I agree. And not just our own personal manufacturing, but some of our allies. We have some really strong allies in Singapore, South Korea, Japan, who could or should be on the cutting edge of this. And maybe a little bit more esoteric, but in my mind, even more strategic from a partnership perspective. Mexico is a manufacturing super hub. I mean, they've got the population, they've got the infrastructure. There's really no reason why we couldn't help Mexico set up a chip manufacturing super infrastructure that would help fulfill the global demand at this point.
That's really interesting. And again, being able to, with the U.S. turning around their technological manufacturing and working with our partners should be really interesting to see, where we head with this. And we're going to finish up this conversation today with a talk about what different people in data science, what people in philosophy, what people in deep learning are saying about the potential future for AI and AGI, where we see that heading. But it's all going to be based on our ability to manufacture these AI chips
and get the resources we need to produce those kind of semiconductors.
Exactly. Super. So let's kick on. This next article is really, really interesting. I had not been clear on a lot of the things that I learned here, so I'm excited to talk these through with you, Brooks. But it's the article is called "Building Telescopes on the Moon Could Transform Astronomy, and It's Becoming an Achievable Goal." And when I was reading this article, one of the things that fascinated me the most was I had no idea that we struggled so much. And you think about the new James Webb telescope and how many decades it took to put this together and how many millions of dollars we funneled into developing this. And one of the most interesting things that I found was that the amount of expense it took to build the solar shield around the James Webb telescope could actually have been saved had we had a very strong lunar
presence.
lunar presence. That's right. Because
Yeah.
what I didn't realize was that in these, on the dark side of the moon, we actually have these huge, what are they called?
Radio caverns.
Radio caverns that are
Yeah.
completely hide all of our radio signals from Earth. And so, the ability that we will have to, to see into the solar system, the galaxy, is just so superior to what we're kind of dealing with today.
Yeah, so it's incredibly fascinating, and I think to me, like one of the things that I guess I knew but didn't think that much about was just how much noise is out there. Obviously, there's galactic noise, but there's so much noise in close proximity that are produced both by us as a species and also our sun. And one of the things that's so unique, not just in our solar system, but it's unique in the entire galaxy, as far as I'm concerned to this day, is that the moon, the lunar Sol orbit, or I'm sorry, the lunar Earth orbit, is unique in the fact that we always will have a dark side of the moon.
Right.
I see that there are some Pink Floyd quotes floating up in the comments right now. It is indeed the dark side of the moon. And what's unique about that is that because we are orbitally locked, no matter what you put on the, I guess, the opposite side of the moon from Earth, it will always stay in the dark. And so as we orbit around the sun, and as the sun and our entire solar cluster continue to move through the galaxy, we basically have a cone of silence that would be around anything on that dark side. And that eliminates everything from radio frequency noise here on Earth to all of the other frequencies. Because keep in mind, radio frequency is just still a light frequency. So
Right.
ultraviolet, infrared, everything else, you essentially have, it's like if I could finally learn to stop putting my mouth so close to the microphone, you would just get the real crisp signal that you want.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I had no idea, how much of a radio signal humans impose upon our ability to really study the solar background. And the apparently it is the most radio quiet location in the entire solar system. So you can't even find another planet in the solar system that has this sort of permanent face away from Earth. So it makes it perfectly suited for radio astronomy.
Not just the solar system, but even if we got to the point where we had like intragalactic travel, where we could go to some of these other exoplanets, this is such an anomaly that it seems unlikely that we will find it, period, elsewhere.
That's wild.
The relationship is so strange between the Earth and Moon. It's far too large for where it sits in our orbital pattern. There's a lot. I mean, we could go on and on about that. But what's really cool, and I saw Aaron said it would shelter from Earth radio, but not light. So it does, in the sense that what the actual, I guess it would be the equator of the moon, produces a constant lunar
magnetic field, or
well, no, it's not even the magnetic field. What it really does is it produces an eclipse. So any
right.
light from the Earth would eclipse around the moon itself, and those rays, or as those packets, if you will, hit the edge of the moon's equator, they're going to bounce outwards. Now, sometimes the sun will be in a certain angle where you're going to get some light, but for the most part, it's just blackness, both signal blackness and light blackness, and that's fantastic for seeing
Right.
out into the galaxy.
Right. And not only that, the ability to, and we're not masters of this just yet, but building in low G may be difficult. But once we have our robotics, skills up to par, it would be really interesting to see what we're able to build in low gravity, because right now we are very, very constricted on the Earth by gravity, but being able to use the low gravity of the moon, we can construct much larger telescopes than would be feasible for free flying satellites. But the ability we would have to create monumental telescopes in very, very low G that don't have radio interference from Earth, that would allow us to peer into the cosmos without any sort of, without having to deal with those, with the radio signals from Earth is massive. It's really,
Right.
really powerful.
And you don't need the exit velocity to get off of the moon like you would Earth, just like you're talking about.
Right.
And then keep in mind you have all that, and then this is one of the reasons that I've seen some of these very future-looking companies that want to mine asteroids. Instead of trying to pull it into Earth's orbit, they could potentially move it into the lunar orbit, where we could mine asteroids up there and move not just the resources from the asteroids, but some of the satellites for them and some of the telemetry gear directly back and forth.
Yeah, I'm curious what the social politics of this are going to look like. Could you, are you call them lunar politics? Like what? Like
Right.
even
Well,
as we begin to discuss these things, I mean, there's going to be a lot of question as to who's able to do what. There's going to be a lot of astronomers who are going to be very, very concerned about where we're placing infrastructure, where we're building versus, because if we do begin to build for other reasons, moon bases and things like this, that's going to have an impact on radio. We're going to be adding radio signals to the dark side of the moon, and so that could have an impact on whether or not these can actually be used for astronomical purposes.
that will absolutely have an impact on it. I think one of the even more pertinent questions, though, it's really going to come down to just old school colonialism. I mean, at this point in time, how many flags are there on the moon?
Good question. How many are there?
As far as I'm aware,
Is it just the one?
just the
Just
one.
the US?
Right? Yeah.
Just the US, huh?
Now, that being said, the Chinese have certainly tried to lay claim, well, not lay claim, I guess, say that they will land on the dark side of the moon and potentially create a base there. So this creates, we've talked about this past couple weeks, this is going to be a space race. We're going to be in a space race. There's no doubt.
Yeah, we're absolutely in a space race, and I think that the hope for humanity is that we're all working together towards common goals. But unfortunately, we all have to reckon with the reality that we have a lot of turmoil when it comes to our ability to work together with other nations towards our common good.
We do, and that's why whether it's for helium-3 on the moon or it's trying to create semiconductors here, we're so close. I mean, we're a mere few decades away from having so much availability of resources, so much technological security that we as a species could basically ensure our longevity by just working together for a little bit. I mean, obviously what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, that's not going to continue, but there it is. And I was wrong. It's not one flag, it's 6 flags, but they all have the same 3 colors in the same kind of pattern with these little star things on them. So I guess that's close enough, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, part of it is resource posturing, right? It's this idea that there are resources on the moon. There is hydrogen that can be used for propellants, for rockets. There's a huge opportunity here for countries to be able to, really position themselves as oh God, what I mean, just interstellar country. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think so. There's definitely some, we'll call it loose hydrogen up there. I think helium-3 is the big one because we're short down here for creating superconductors that are eligible to meet. I don't understand the deep science of it. I'll be honest here, but we're short on helium, and it's not just the helium, the H2 or the He2 that goes into balloons that we're missing out on. There is helium-3, which is in short supply here on Earth and the crust. And that is, my understanding is that's in pretty strong supply on the lunar surface without a ton of deep mining.
Okay. That's
so medical equipment, superconductor development, and some other things that are of that nature.
Right. And helium is non-renewable here on Earth. Is that right?
As far as I'm aware, I mean, keep in mind, though, as soon as we get into deep nuclear fusion and we're fusing hydrogen atoms, they're going to become helium. So we'd produce helium that way. It'd be a terrible byproduct to have.
It would be a terrible... You're being sarcastic?
Sarcasm, yeah.
Like, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, it would be. It's much better than, like uranium-235 that just, is cancer-causing.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think there's a, again, even when we have geopolitical conflicts, like we were talking about this last week, that we still have an International Space Station. We still are working with the Russians on the International Space Station. As far as I'm aware, that hasn't changed, has it?
We haven't. So at one point in time, the Russians were the only ones sending rockets up to the station. In a very good turn of fortune for us, it's now kind of switched gears. The cosmonauts, as far as I'm aware, I think the last one's left.
Okay.
I'll double check that. Or AI
No,
or
we'll
AI
we'll
Randy,
leave
can you?
in 2024. It looks like. Yeah,
Okay,
they're going to be
okay.
launching
I
their
knew
own
there was a,
space station.
which is weird because the Chinese just put up Shenzhen, yeah, Shenzhen, which is theirs. So I didn't know. I was unaware that the Russians were making an attempt to launch a third international or a third national space station.
Yeah. Why Russia is abandoning the International Space Station. This was as of July 6, 26, 2022. Russia has announced that it will leave the International Space Station as of 2024 and launch its own new space station soon afterward. We'll see about that. I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, Space Force is not going to be happy about that.
We need to have some conversations about Space Force. We haven't done that before. We'll get some information on that for you guys because I haven't heard a lot about Space Force lately, but I think there's a lot to dig in there.
There is, and interesting. It was a purely hypothetical based on the television show, but the idea that um, if we had moon assets, the Chinese could basically come and do anything they wanted to up there without repercussion because there's no real defense mechanism at this point in time on the lunar surface.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, it's definitely open game right now.
It is, and it's a vast new horizon for us.
Yep. All right, let's dig into. So apparently, Google Brain and Deep Mind have joined forces. Let's dig into this a little bit, and maybe we'll do a few seconds on the difference. Aaron Desario is somebody in the audience who might know a little bit about this as well. Google Brain and Deep Mind are both research organizations focusing on artificial intelligence, but they have some very different origins, goals, areas of focus. Google Brain is a research team that actually founded in 2011 and is affiliated with and funded by Google. Its research often collaborates with other teams within the company, whereas DeepMind was actually a British AI company founded in 2010, which Google acquired, but has allowed them to work separately over time. DeepMind operates as an independent subsidiary of Alphabet, Google's parent company, that allows DeepMind to maintain distinct research and agenda and culture. And so you might be familiar with AlphaGo from DeepMind, which actually was the first AI to defeat the human champion of Go. And oops, sorry about that. And they also developed AlphaFold, which was the revolutionary protein folding prediction system, which is just extraordinary. So it's really interesting to see Google taking these subsidiaries, which have a history of, I don't want to say competition, but definitely not, they weren't friends.
Well, so not only were they not friends, but healthy competition. Let's call it healthy competition here, right?
Okay.
Same agenda for the most part. Let's learn, develop, train these AIs to try to replicate human skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very big thing because what we're going to be looking at is that we've talked a lot about Chat GPT, and it's currently doing its best to not compete, to reduce its own footprint, if you will, liability footprint. And now we're going to start to see some of these other companies and these other organizations who are going to be able to step into that fold and replace some of what individual users were trying to do with ChatGPT.
Yes. So yeah, we could further dig into that as well as looking at Bard and what they're releasing over at Google. So Bard is the congruent large language model that Google has been developing for a very long time. And they've got, and I think the interesting thing about Google is, again, they've been holding back for so long in releasing a lot of these, and OpenAI just threw a monkey wrench in their business planning, and they were absolutely not wanting to release as much as they were pushed to release in such a short period of time. And even there was a lot of people in a lot of these teams in Google who were saying Bard is not ready, Bard is not ready, Bard is not ready, and they released it anyway. And there were some massive hiccups along the way. The CEO of Google, I believe his name is Pichai. Pichai, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
He was not somebody who wanted to really release this, and then he was kind of forced to. And so they're in this interesting state of realigning their entire business model and all of their AI organizations to now, that's kind of why they're bringing Deep Mind and Brain together, because they want to really transform this field, and we'll see if they can. Is that my new picture?
No, that's Sundar Pichai.
That's him. That's that guy.
So in reality, though, I'm curious to see where the pressure came from to release all of this so swiftly. Maybe board of directors, maybe stockholders meetings, something along those lines. But ultimately, I mean, yeah, Bard was not at production ready. I don't think it had hit like any of the major like IOCs. It still had a lot of testing to go through. And then to not only unleash that, but to start to take some of their smaller subsidiaries, push them together. I just my personal feeling, I think this is an overreaction, and maybe a big mistake to not keep your cards a little bit closer to your chest here.
That's an interesting point. I definitely think that Alphabet felt the crunch from Microsoft releasing these new variations of Bing. I think that, and as we talked about earlier, you've got Microsoft now in the chip race. They're deep in the AI hunt. They want to release all of these different AI-enabled workspaces moving forward. So I think that Microsoft positioned itself. It's been a sleeper for a long time when it comes to AI technology. It's been a sleeper for a long time when it comes to search. They were just getting crushed by Alphabet over and over and over again. But now to see what they've done in working together with OpenAI, to me, it sounds like they were poised to rock, and Alphabet wasn't, which is surprising because of the head start that Alphabet had. So it's very, very surprising.
So, and Aaron just said Alphabet was caught napping. Again, I don't know that it was caught napping. I think Microsoft made a very, very clever deal with OpenAI to go ahead and leverage what they had going. This is not something that was developed by Microsoft. As far as I'm aware, Microsoft has not entered their own pawns into the game. They've basically just utilized what was already available.
Yeah, they just invested in OpenAI.
And if you wanted to beat Google at search, then all you have to do is just like show me a link that asks for what I searched for. So that's not really hard.
But I mean, to Aaron's point, that is, I mean, they were so far ahead in the AI race. Alphabet was so far ahead of Microsoft that I think they got comfortable. And they weren't pushing people. I mean, I've read articles about some of these DeepMind folks and some of these, or excuse me, Google Brain folks who, the corporate culture was more about like where we're vacationing this year versus what the outcomes of of our AI would produce. And that's, that is a very reductive comment. But I think it helps to illustrate the point that you can't expect this not to be a race, and for Alphabet to be sitting on incredible AI and not be really driving it into the future. I think Microsoft did catch them sleeping a little bit.
I'll buy that in the sense that they didn't think that there was a competitor out there, and it turned out that the tortoise had already made his second lap. Yeah, okay,
exactly. They weren't aware. They didn't realize it, which is surprising. You think Silicon Valley was smaller?
Well, and it is, but it's the giants looking at each other. I mean, Google's looking, or Alphabet's looking at Microsoft, who's looking at Facebook, who's looking at, I mean, that's it. No one's looking at Netflix for AI, so it's not an issue there. But I mean, I think that's what happened, is that they were so busy, like, kind of taking the barometer on each other and seeing what the litmus test was there. And I the Alphabet folks were essentially thinking, we're so far ahead, none of these little players are going to show up and interrupt the circus. And they sure did.
I don't think they realize how good OpenAI's large language model was going to be. I don't think they thought GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 would be as good as they are. I've played with all of it. I've played with GPT 4 in Bing. I've played with GPT 4, GPT 3.5. I've played with Bard, and I just find GPT to be the most enjoyable experience, even though it's super, like, the actual UI is terrible. Like, I've got 1,000 different folders of different questions I've asked, and like, nothing's organized. I can't organize it. I have to go to alternative I have to go to alternative UIs and developers to find cool ways of using my OpenAI key to get a better user interface. But like, just the technology behind the actual language model that is GPT-4 is just incredible. I mean, I don't know. For me, Bard wasn't even close.
And so my guess is you're absolutely right, and Aaron's probably right, that they were caught sleeping, but it wasn't so much that they were caught sleeping on Microsoft. They didn't think a small player could come in and interrupt the race. And that's what happened, at least up to this point. Now, when we actually see what should have been a production Bard or a production DeepMind, or something along those lines, I'll be really curious to see how much closer to a GAC, a GAI it is than this is.
An AGI.
AGI, yeah, just AGI. Me and
acronyms today.
Acronyms.
No, I get it. No, man. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And I think we talk about this a lot, but I think it's so important, and I can't imagine us not talking about this every week for the next many, many years, is this idea of how these systems are going to develop. When you hear people talk about like human-like intelligence, I think it's important to remember, like, these models are trained on, again, billions of parameters. They have to really pour over content over and over. They don't have the same sort of reasoning skills that the human brain does. But isn't it just a matter of time? Like, I just have a hard time thinking that this isn't just a matter of time, that these things can actually reason the way humans reason, as opposed to just being a fill in the blank, multimodal language model that is just using predictive text to come up with the answer to a question.
Well, that reasoning development is going to be based upon the training parameters it's given. And as those continue to, over time, leap by orders of magnitude, so is the reasoning capabilities. Just like, I don't know. I happen to be spending a lot of time around a 11-month-old, a little bit around a 6-month-old, and I watch, in the matter of months, their reasoning skills jump mountains over themselves. Like, things like spatial awareness, things like being aware that something exists when it's outside of their field of view. These are things that are going to change for artificial intelligences in the same order of linearity, most likely. Don't quote me on this, but most likely that they would for human developing, because as they develop, those parameters are going to get stronger and be reinforced and retrained by the individuals that are training them.
Right. I guess what's difficult for me is to like clearly define what reasoning skills are and to what level things like predictive text LLM models are able to do so. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I was reading an article recently about GPT-4, and one of the things that Sam Altman was saying is like, excuse me, we're maxing out. Like, he was talking about how right now, like, people utilize these ideas of like how many parameters it's trained on in a similar way we were talking about gigahertz years ago, or even like megapixels on a camera. Remember, everyone was like,
Yeah.
"How many megapixels can you get on your camera?" And it's like ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Like there's a point of diminishing return when it comes to megapixels, just like there's a point of diminishing return when it comes to large language model parameter training. And I just wonder, based on what they're saying, it's like, oh yeah, we're almost at the limits of what GPT-4 can do when it comes, or our GPT models can do when it comes to just adding more parameters. Now, he definitely says that they're going to find other ways to improve and maximize. And I think this is one thing about Sam Altman that is very impressive, is that he looks at for what's working and he just keeps doing that over and over and over and over again. And I think
Absolutely.
when people think about AI, like, large language models are not the most elegant way to get to AGI. It's just not. They're not they don't implicitly reason, right? And so getting to this point where we have truly human-like intelligent reasoning AIs, I would just wonder if it's further off than we may think.
I don't know that it's necessarily further off. I think what we're going to continue to see, just like we did, I think it's a great analogy, right? You were talking about gigahertz and megapixels, and we were, once upon a time, I remember looking at a 300 megahertz processor on a computer that I was like, oh man, this will almost like render a real 3D game. We'll check that out. And then we've moved from that processing model to having both a PCU or a CPU. See, me and it's hurting. So sorry, a CPU, a GPU, and then now, even as Aaron brought up, the tensor processing units. We're going to be looking at different modal ways to process information in similar but different ways. And I think you're right. I think that the large language model is not going to necessarily be the singular foundation upon which an AGI is built. But what it will do is help us to identify what that next step in the evolution of artificial intelligence is. And as the different large language models continue to grow, whether it's by better training, better quality training data, or it's larger sets of parameters, one way or the other, we're going to get to the next step. And I don't think it's going to slow us down very much. I was kind of on the other side of the boat just a few months ago when we started this conversation about Chat GPT.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was like maybe a blip, even like a little flash in the pan that would show us some interesting information, and we would continue to wait another 15, 20 years. I mean, I think we're right in the middle of the Daytona 500 right now.
Oh, I don't disagree with you. I guess my question is, have we hit a point of exponential growth when it comes to large language models, as opposed to, like, I think you're right. Again, going back to Sam Altman, one of the things that makes him so impressive as the CEO of OpenAI is his ability to iterate on things that work. And I think
Right.
that, it's very easy to get lost in what you want to be true versus what actually is true. And I think he has a very, very strong understanding of that. And I think that's going to help grow, continue to develop these AIs. I just don't know, I don't know to what extent speed is going to be. I just don't know if it's going to be growing. I don't know if LLMs are going to be growing at the same incremental speed that we've seen over the very recent period of AI intelligence.
No, they'll hit their peak of, where's my hand? There we go. Peak of the hockey stick, and then it'll be the next curve up, right? And I think one of the things so Sam Altman does a fantastic job as a leader of a smaller organization that has the ability to truly be agile, where there's no way that the fact that Alphabet had 3 different teams at one point in time working on 3 different, whether they're large language models or just AI algorithms in general, it shows the difficulty of turning a big ship.
Right.
And I think as we see some of these smaller players get into it and probably get bought up, I mean, let's be real, it's likely going to happen. We're going to see that next step in the pattern or be derived.
Right. Aaron says, imagine LLMs trained on data from your company. And this is something that people are working on right now. I mean, I've been, I've got a company that I work with, and one of their biggest challenges is keeping up with customer service and the ability to take an AI and train it on your own data and then release a customer service bot that is as good as GPT. That's a huge wave in development in in online commerce.
Eh, Not only in online commerce, but in just unfortunately replacing human beings. People are very bad, and this is you can speak to pretty much any small CEO, any small business owner and runner, hiring people and training them to do what you would do if you weren't there in a dilemma is one of the most difficult tasks can ever be done. But you can
Yeah.
teach a large language model to do something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I was watching a video the other day. Somebody was there's already I'll see if I can find it after the show. But there is this guy was already doing it. He's got like thousands of blogs that he's written. He's got hundreds of YouTube videos. And so what he did was he just downloaded all that information, took all of the data that he'd ever communicated out, and it literally it just trains from it. Uses it's a plug or not a plugin, excuse me. It's an API for OpenAI, and it uses GPT, and it takes all the information you've ever known and creates a U bot, a virtual CEO bot that can then answer questions based on what it thinks you would most likely say. Like what?
But this goes all the way back to, I mean, circa 2008. I mean, I'm way off here, but when Tim Ferriss first wrote the 4 Hour Work Week, one of his big things was if you don't have time to do it yourself, automate it. And if you can't find an easy way, and at this point in time, there's very little, digital automation. So hire someone who needs a lot less resources than you. Teach them how to make decisions like you would. Give them parameters to follow that they would have to.
Right.
So if it's a $50 decision, just say yes and give them $50 so they'll leave you alone, whatever it may be. But this goes all the way back. I mean, I remember reading that book and it being like finishing college and going, I'm going to do that one day. I'm going to automate everything that I ever want to. And
Right.
now I can literally create a me bot. It'll probably determine what I want to have for dinner. If it can do that, then we're set.
I completely agree. And it's coming fast. I mean, like when I complain about the extent to which these large language models are potentially inhibited by the actual amount of parameters that they can actually access, I am totally optimistic on the other end about what the current GPTs can do. They're just, as developers start to discover what's possible and what the potentials are. We talked about AI agents last week, and being able to use GPTs to automate a CEO job or to automate certain development tasks. And we're just seeing it improve and improve over time. I'm really excited it's amazing on Twitter. I'm just like watching these developers who are all in on AI and developing different apps and UIs based on these GPT models, what they're creating in such a short period of time. It's just incredible. So I think there's infinite possibilities when it comes to utilizing and creating new and interesting ways of developing these GPT models. But I go from week to week from being hyper optimistic about the growth and the speed at which we're going to see AGI to then being a little bit more conservative. So I have a feeling this will continue to happen.
Ups and downs. I mean, it's just kind of humanity and the things we create, right? I mean, we look at 2 years ago, we were pretty certain that everyone was going to have an electric car in the next 15 years. And now there's been a little bit of concern to that now.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of that, and this may be where we see some issues as well. As we talked about at the beginning of this episode, we've got a chip race to build AI, to build chips that can handle AI. And those are limited. We have a limited ability, a limited infrastructure. There are, mineral requirements that need to be this all goes back into everything we talk about on the show, whether it's going to the moon, the space race, the developing new tools here on Earth. I mean, all of these things are moving us in the direction of what we call here in the show the technological singularity. And it should be interesting how it's. I think what's fascinating is how interconnected it all is. You can't just talk about AI. You can't just talk about development of robot technology. You can't just talk about nanobots. It's all going to be integrated.
It's a spider web.
It's a spider web of what life's going to look like in the next 10 to 15
absolutely.
years.
And I think, and this goes, I mean, I was reading the article, the Google article earlier, and as soon as I saw Deep Mind, I was thinking of Deep Thought, which is the Douglas Adams computer that spent 1 million years trying to decide what the answer to life, the universe, and everything is.
Right.
It turns out it was 42. Still haven't figured out what the question is. And that's, I mean, we're getting so close, right? We are right on that precipice where we will be able to take the summation of human knowledge over the course of the last tens of thousands of years and develop something that can produce an answer for us that we can't even comprehend. We're not that far from that.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling. I could use an AI therapist. I hear that. Could you imagine, like, and I think that's something that's really powerful because, like, when you think about, and we could broaden this content and we broaden this conversation into the entire medical field, but when you think about the cost of assessment just to get and maybe like if I'm in need of a therapist, first of all, finding a therapist that I actually like and can communicate with and who I feel comfortable with is a huge challenge. Being able to afford said therapist, being able to be able really connect with that person is a huge challenge, especially when you don't know, it's very difficult to know whether that therapist is bringing you in the right direction where you actually need and want to go. So this idea of AI and therapy, I think, is a really important one. Now, obviously, we have to have real regulation around these things to ensure that we're not just walking people off a cliff where an AI is hallucinating and we have very negative outcomes. But when you think about, here you go. When you think about the cost of healthcare, wow, healthcare administrators up 1,000% since over 1,000% since 1920. Physicians only about not even 200%. So when you think about the cost of healthcare administration versus the actual physicians, it's just crazy. But to that point, like, if I have, would I rather have a GPT therapist who has access to all of the latest studies and the newest innovations and the greatest opportunities when it comes to therapy, or do I want to go to one person who is just one person? I think it's fascinating.
So I'm going to go other direction on that one. I would much rather have an artificial intelligence surgeon cut my heart out, give me the brain surgery I need, check my kidneys, all that fun stuff, whatever it is, triple bypass, that's fine. The two things I want a person to do are A, listen to my problems and tell me that they're terrified of talking to me.
And but B, like you're joking, but wait 1 second. You're joking because when you say A, that's a joke, but I think a lot of people don't even ever go to therapy because they're afraid of that thing. So go ahead. What's B?
I would actually be really upset if I went and told like all of my problems to an artificial intelligence, like, oh, you're just like everybody else. And then I'd shoot myself. Okay. And my B is I absolutely have to have a human proctologist.
And why is that?
I have an idea of a robot sticking their finger there. It's unacceptable.
I think this idea of having, human. So this is something that comes up in this AI conversation a lot, and this idea that humans or AI is not going to take your job. Humans using AI are going to take your job. This is where the power, I think, is going to come from, is the ability of someone. I was looking up I think it's called Glass.ai or Glass.. So if you look up Glass AI in your browser, basically what it is, it's a GPT-4 enabled AI that is for physicians and medical students. And basically you can write in whatever a patient is presenting, and it'll give you the most logical outcome utilizing all of the data points. And I would much rather have a skilled physician, human, who has access to these things, as well as I think therapy could be the same thing, where you have an AI enhanced human who has all of the latest data. You think about
someone who's doing the diagnoses and the prognostication based on the summation of information and not just their tiny little education, not to diminish anyone's education.
Right.
But
No, but
yeah,
that's a powerful point. This idea that we have hundreds of thousands of studies every single year that are published in medical journals. By the way, you want to talk about admin, you want to talk about people who are just jacking money, is these publishers who basically, okay, if you don't know how this works, it's horrifying. So
no, say it. It's
a
fucked up.
grant
It's fucked up.
okay, so this is how these scientific and medical studies are done in universities or private institutions. So a grant, either a public or a private grant, is given to an organization, oftentimes these are universities, to produce a study. They produce the study, they publish the study, then they have to pay a publisher to get that study in the publisher. Then the university students, all of these studies have to be peer reviewed. And so the people who peer review these studies, not the publishers, the university professionals, the medical professionals in these organizations who are not getting paid by the publishers to do so. So you've got this monopoly of publishers who are getting paid, and all they are is gatekeepers in between people producing studies, the folks who pay for it, you and me, and then ultimately the people who need to peer review these studies. And it's talk about administration cost. It's absolute. It's horrifying.
It's a racket. It's a racket.
It's a racket.
And the peer reviewers are often volunteers who are in a similar field to the individual who developed the initial and executed the initial study. So their hope is to glean a little bit of information early so that they could maybe produce an adjunct study. This happens most particularly in the psychological fields and the psychopharmaceutical fields. I don't know that much directly about medicine, but I spent 3.5 years working in a very prominent social psychologist lab, two different social psychologist labs. And this is one of the things that happens all the time. Is they develop a study, they release a study, and you know what? If you need access to it, you shoot them an email. If you see the byline, shoot them an email. Hey, I'd love to read your study directly. They will send it to you free of charge because they're not making a dime when it gets published by whatever Scientific Monthly or whomever the publisher may be.
Yeah. There was a kid, and I was just listening to a Radiolab episode about this the other day, and he was a young guy, I think it was like 2010, and he saw this issue with publishers, and he saw how like all of these students, all of these graduate students, like being able to find these publications and these studies was so difficult and expensive. They would have to spend a lot of money just to gather this information. And then he actually created an open source database for all these kids. I think it was called Psy something. I can't remember. I'll remember in a minute. But the sad thing was this kid was raided by the FBI, ended up committing suicide just because he wanted to democratize graduate students' ability to cite research papers and develop their own knowledge, which would ultimately improve society and civilization. But no, we have
it's capitalism at its worst. It really is. And it's interesting because it's not intellectual property that's being utilized. It's not being monetized. It's not like a publisher, it's not like the creator of the published article is trying to sell this at all to begin with. Even if they discovered something, I mean, let's go back, right? Let's go back to penicillin. Penicillin was a declined trademark to ensure that the whole world could get it.
Right.
And and you know what? You know what else was? And what we're still dealing with to this day all the time is if you have diabetes and you need insulin.
Yeah.
And now it's being controlled by a few different production labs, and that's it. and the state of California, who's finally trying to get their hands in it. But
Yeah, I think there is some movement, right? I've read a couple
there's
articles recently that they're trying to make some movement in making insulin much more affordable. But your point is worthy and stands. And we do have to talk about this another day. Aaron brought up self-driving cars. We need an autonomous AI car conversation bad, because there is a lot of misunderstandings
and there's
in
some
that
really
field.
cool stuff that I actually learned when I was doing the work I did with MIT on the AI machine learning, and
Mhm.
it goes back to like the ethics basis. Like, how do you train a car to run over one 85-year-old and not three 3-year-olds, or the other way around, or whatever it may be? Because these are things that intelligence has to. Those are parameters it has to have.
Mm. It reminds me, and this is kind of a silly metaphor, but I think it's a valid metaphor. It reminds me back in the early, I believe, 1900s, when elevators were first rolled out, and you always had an elevator attendant. There was always somebody in there who's going up and down, and they would push buttons. And when they started to eliminate elevator attendants, people lost their shit. Like, they were terrified of getting on elevators without somebody driving the elevator. And that's a very different thing than a self-driving car, but it does speak to the psychology and the sociology of humans in our fear of change, even if statistically speaking, the argument is moot. Like, there's no.
I think it's a very, very analogous conversation to why do we still have pilots on planes? Every one of
Mm,
those aircraft can take off and land by themselves. Only in the most unique, very, very small percentage environment does something happen in which a pilot on a commercial aircraft needs to do anything himself manually.
mm,
And that's been since the 70s. So we're talking 50 years ago.
right.
These aircraft could take off and land by themselves. But the
Yeah,
idea, like you're saying,
yeah. The idea of being up in the air without a pilot is horrifying, even though it's the chance of there being a negative outcome is statistically uh statistically unlikely. And what's even more likely is when one of these systems goes out of the tracks and one of the human beings has to take over, they often make mistakes anyway.
they don't typically do the right thing. It's not their fault. Human nature in a terrifying, catastrophic environment. Some people fight, some people flight, some people just poop their pants.
Yeah, it's wild. Let's pop over to this second to last article here. New free VR program, Cyreal, lets you experience psychedelic trips without drugs. This was written by Tim McMillan over at The Debrief. And it's really interesting. This is actually some open source software, so you could literally go check this out right now. It's called Cyreal, Psyreal, which simulates suggestive effects of phenomenological components of psychedelic experiences. And so, if you've never had a psychedelic experience, basically what happens is a part of your brain called the thalamus, which usually regulates, and some people call this the default mode network, where it just basically allows you to go, okay, I have 10 things to do today. I need to do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. And it limits the amount of data and information that comes flooding into your consciousness from your senses. And so the idea of this is to create or to induce a similar type experience. And what they're finding is they haven't exactly they haven't seen it necessarily in the brain chemistry changes as you would see in a psychedelic experience, but the outcomes are often very similar, just as we're seeing a huge renaissance in the use of psychedelics to treat all kinds of issues, including depression, anxiety, PTSD. The
Addiction,
opportunity, what's that? Addiction.
addiction. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. What we're seeing success with these psychedelic drugs, they're also seeing some interesting early studies using this sort of virtual reality LSD, psilocybin type experience. And I think the cool thing about this particular article is one of the things that they had been testing in the past is they felt like just having the same sort of visual fields over and over didn't create the same effect. So one of the things about psychedelic experiences, you'll often go you'll often move to very different visual experiences. And so that's what they tried to replicate. They tried to replicate all these sorts of different visual experiences. And they were getting very interesting results, similar to psychedelics, which is fascinating.
So Have you tried this at all? Just
I
out
have
of
not.
curiosity.
No, I'm
So
excited to though. I'm gonna have
I
to
have
borrow
not
my
tried
son's. Yeah, go ahead.
his Oculus, or is he
Yeah,
he's
no,
got a like a
he's got the I don't know, he's got a
PlayStation
super.
or one of the okay.
I don't forget what it's called. It's
Anyway,
a,
I've got one of the Oculus ones, and I have not
okay.
tried Cyreal, but there is another app that is originally based in meditation called Trip, TRIPP, I think it is,
Okay.
and they have an entire platform under it. And I'm assuming it's similar because I haven't seen too many. I saw a couple of videos from Cyreal that I thought looked very similar.
Okay.
And the idea is you're standing in a full 360 dome, experiencing a multitude of colors, sounds. It tends to be more surreal, and maybe it'll be totally different for Cyreal. Maybe it's discordant, even. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
But I remember doing this and going, wow, this is pretty interesting. It seems very similar to not what you would see or feel, because if you actually take psychedelics, the idea that you have a ton of different visual stimulants or simulations going on, it's not as hyperbolized as what we see in movies and television, things like
Right.
that. But
But you are getting a massive flood of serotonin.
and like you said, when you're talking about the difference between what our normal default mode cortex
Yeah, but the default mode system, which is
system is, yeah.
yeah, yeah, in this particular article they call it, they talk specifically about the thalamus. The default mode network is what the guy from Maps
Yeah, that's what it is.
yeah,
Default
that's a
mode network. Yeah. So
yeah,
default mode network is the basis of the fact that, just like you said, there's a tiny little a bridge between our two hemispheres of our
hemispheres. Yeah,
cortex that essentially tries to eliminate as much noise as possible.
right.
So whether that could be, and a lot of this is totally theoretical at this point in time, but there is a belief that the default mode network actually reduces the number of colors we see, reduces the pitches of sounds that we hear, although there's less likelihood of that because of the way we know the cochlea works. But from a sensory perspective, the olfactory senses, our smells and tastes, there's probably a lot of things in the air that we don't get, because if we did, we wouldn't be able to sit down and have higher level thought as much as we do as human beings. In the
And
sense
maybe is it higher level thought or the ability to focus on one thing at a time?
and then, that's an excellent point. I'm not sure. The way I heard it described was we probably wouldn't have produced the tools that we've produced if we were sitting around just enjoying all the nature around us all the time. And that's
Exactly.
what the basis of the default mode network was we would just all be sitting around butt ass naked with our feet in a river somewhere, eating apples.
We'd
And
never
probably
survive.
back. And whoa, I mean,
No, I don't think we survive. I mean, that's the thing. Like that's what the thalamus does. It gives you the ability to not be like I wouldn't be able to function in life if I was tripping all the time. Like
oh no,
you
yeah,
can't
that's true.
function.
That's fair. That's fair. That's a good point. And so you go back to the survive. You mean like, yeah, if
Yeah.
a woolly mammoth came out of the brush and I was just sitting there, I would probably try to pet it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fair. I get it. I get
Exactly.
you.
Exactly.
That being said, there's another big part that plays in there, not only with the thalamus, the hypothalamus, but also with the amygdala, which is our emotional response receptor, right?
Mm.
So it sits pretty close to the cerebellum on the backside of what we consider the old brain. And if
The
you've ever
lizard brain.
yes, well, yeah, the lizard brain, the brainstem, and the bottom part of the cerebellum are the lizard brain. But if you ever walked into a room and you like smelled something that you knew was like, that's my grandma's house, circa 1985, and we were watching, I don't know, Rugrats on TV because I was a kid in 85. I actually was not born myself in 85, but whatever. Long story short, you would have an emotional response to a specific sensory input because your amygdala enhances the neuroconnectivity at that point. So not only does your thalamus and your hypothalamus erupt or reduce the eruption inputs that they have for the sensory inputs, but your amygdala increases those sensory inputs, and now you're feeling, we won't call it everything, but something a lot more than you would in a normal experience. I've not tried the Cyreal. I'm going to check it out tonight. we'll have a little report back next week on it. But I will tell you from an experience with the trip emulator, you lose sight of how high you are off the ground, what you're feeling, what you're thinking at any given time, and you kind of just sit back and probably, like you said, Mike, wouldn't survive if you were out in the wild that way.
Yeah. Yeah, they are incredible experiences, and I'm very interested to see where this technology can go, especially for people who have concerns about taking hallucinogens.
Sure,
I think that's
absolutely.
one of the fears people have. So being able to bypass that in some way, or at least maybe like give you some training wheels before you try it, might be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And there's some real concerns out there, and one of the biggest, especially when you talk about PTSD, one of the biggest I don't even know if I could call it hallucinogenic, but psychotropic drug is ketamine. And some people have really negative responses to ketamine.
I only had great responses to ketamine.
Well, I will share. I can share this one fully because it happened in a purely medical environment. I had to get staples taken out of my legs from my skin grafts, and they gave me. I was 11 years old, and they gave me ketamine.
Really?
Okay. And they told me that I wouldn't feel anything. I didn't. And then I would wake up and it would be totally fine. I had this incredible dream that I was a jigsaw puzzle and birds were flying down and taking my puzzle pieces away. Oof. And I've been broken since. So.
That's very sad.
So it was probably worse than actually getting burned, which is what I was getting the skin grafts taken off for.
Oh, and you just had a horrible psychotropic experience. Yeah. That sucks. Yeah, not being ready for those experiences can be a problem. Okay, let's kick on to our final piece for the evening. It's an article published. This is April 18th. Will AI ever reach human level intelligence? We asked 5 experts, and so we started this conversation with the limitations that we see from a technological side when it comes to building artificial intelligence, from the chipsets that are required all the way to the large language models that may or may not be hitting a point of diminishing return. But I think it's interesting to look at each of these 5 folks. One is Christina Marr, computational neuroscientist, biomedical engineer. Dana R., lecturer in AI and data science. Marcel M., lecturer in business analytics. Paul Formosa, professor in philosophy and co-director at the Center of Agency or Values and Ethics. And then Syedel Mirjali. And we won't go through all these, but I wanted to give you guys just kind of an idea as to like the different focuses of these folks. This last guy is professor, director of Center of Artificial Intelligence Research and Optimization. So you'd imagine these folks having very different outcomes, but they were all pretty darn similar. Let me just go over Paul Formosa real quick. AI, philosophy of technology. AI has already achieved and surpassed human intelligence in many tasks. It can beat us at strategy games such as Go, chess, StarCraft, and diplomacy, outperform us on many language model benchmarks, and write passable undergraduate university essays. Then he goes on, his last thing that he says, however, the rise of AI suggests that we can have intelligence without consciousness. And this is what I always find so fascinating, because intelligence can be understood in functional terms. An intelligent entity can do intelligent things such as learn, reason, write essays, or use tools. The AIs we create may never have consciousness, but they are increasingly able to do intelligent things. In some cases, they already do them at a level beyond us, which is a trend that will likely continue. And I thought that was such an interesting way to articulate that, because we've had this conversation about what is sentience so many times. And one of the things that, I hear from folks who are very concerned about AI now and into the future and the potential for building AGI is that it can get away from us. And a lot of people say, well, it's never going to be sentient, so it can't get away from us. But that's not necessarily the point or true. As long as it's super intelligent, it could potentially outsmart us. Whether or not it has awareness or feelings or feels joy or pain or anything else, that's not necessarily the thing that drives intelligence. And I don't think that we think about that a lot.
I think that's a very important point, and we've absolutely had this conversation. And I do think that consciousness, that sentience, is a long ways off. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't have something that is both smarter than us and more concerned about its own survival, I think, is what everyone else wants to use to elaborate the point that this thing could be dangerous. But Mike, I'll tell you, I'm not even worried about the consciousness part. I'm actually less worried about that than I am the super intelligence.
Interesting. Because I always felt like, well, super intelligence is great because it's not going to have a will. It's not going to have its own will. But maybe
Well,
that's just naive.
but sure, its will could be based upon its own parameters. I mean, let's go back to Asimov's laws of robotics, right? So they're benevolently inclined towards humans, but if the laws, which are not consciousness themselves, were that robots survive over humans, then that sentience means nothing when it comes to an artificial
Right.
intelligence. I would almost rather have a strongly willed conscious AI who's aware of its own power than something that's super intelligent without that awareness.
Mm. Yeah. Yep. And I think we touched on this last week, but it's this idea of, we're creating, even though we are the creators of these large language models and they are training on human data. One might argue, well, then they're going to have, our sensibilities and our experience and our not perception, but our uh, because they learn what we learn and they would think like we think. And I don't know that's obviously not necessarily true. We don't know if they will think like we think because they don't have the same sort of evolutionary biology we have. And yes, we are building these things on human language. We are, trying to replicate neural networks that we understand in the brain, but we understand so little about the brain as
It's
it
very true.
is.
Yeah, that's
It's
very
very
true.
difficult to say what a thinking machine.
But let me ask you this. I mean, what language do we train dogs on? It's still human language, isn't it?
Right. Yep.
And as far as I can tell, they're all better than we are. So,
I actually think in a benevolent future in which the AI is not dystopic, I actually tend to believe that we will be more like the pets.
well, you know what? I have no problem with being fed, napping, getting my belly rubbed frequently. That sounds fantastic. Take me on a couple of walks every once in a while,
Yeah.
Just don't neuter me, please. I promise I won't procreate. Okay?
Right.
Um or procreate more than I already did prior to being a pet. Whatever the preliminary requirement there is. But
Mhm.
that being said, I mean, I don't even know that it's sad. It might even be the other way around. It's very possible that an intelligence that we developed is more interested in serving us than it is in serving itself.
Say that one more time.
It's very possible that an intelligence we developed is more interested in serving us than it is in serving itself. And
It's
that's my concern.
well, I think it's wait, you're saying it's less, so you're thinking it's more likely to want to serve. You think it's potentially likely that there's potential for it to want to serve itself as opposed to the
No,
humans
no,
who
no.
designed it.
I
Oh,
think it's going to want to serve us more than it's going to want to serve
and you
itself.
see that as a problem?
Yeah, because it depends on who it determines as the master, right? If it's a
Right,
despot or a theocrat or just a jerk,
right.
it could be. But if it was to attempt to serve the whole of humanity, it may, and I believe will make better decisions than we can. I would rather have a board of directors, and I've said this before, but I'd rather have a board of directors made of artificial general intelligences than I would human beings.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that profoundly.
I've seen what
It's
humans do, especially ones who have power.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like each of these different people in this particular article all come from very different domains, but not one of them doesn't believe AGI is likely. I find that to be very, very interesting because, you know, it's not as if these are all tech bros.
Right, right.
Um, and if that's the case, if AGI is the most likely outcome here, put putting alignment with human beings on the front door, it's like right now Asimov's laws are just in a book somewhere. We're not actually prescribing these to LLMs or to potential AGI. We really need to be thinking about
Yeah, how to develop that, right? Here
how
are the
to develop that
15. Oh no, the 10 commandments
of AI. Yeah, man. Fantastic. Anything you want to close out with, Brooks?
I think I'm good. I mean, honestly, it's wonderful to continue to have this conversation and see we are right now, like you said, at a week to week development of not just technology, but how the modern AI artifacts are continuing to shift the rest of the technologies. And I think you made an excellent point earlier about none of these are unattached from each other. We're going to continue to see a spider web amongst these different technologies, and it very well may be led by AI and the chip war that goes into creating the best AI.
Let's not forget about the space race.
Well, and actually, real brief point because I
Yeah.
forgot about it until you just said space race again. The Chinese allowed an AI to regulate a satellite. Did you see this?
No.
Yes. So it was a smaller communications and surveillance satellite that it used previously for, I think, just like geosurveying type stuff. And as
Okay.
soon as an AI had overtaken its processing development, it started to only check on Indian and Japanese military bases.
Wow.
Little a preview for next week. We'll get into a little bit more. I've got actually some more to come for what we'll talk about on that for next week.
Wow, that is fascinating. If you're somebody who likes to stay up to date on all the latest in technology and its infinite spiderweb and effect on the potential technological singularity, well, guess what? You are in the right place. Make sure you join us live here on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be with you every single week. You can also check us out over at Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to being with you guys. We enjoy it every single week. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk to you guys real soon.
Have a great night.
Cheers.